Hey everyone, and thanks for joining us for a free Legacy Tree Live event. My name is Amber Brown, Marketing Manager for Legacy Tree Genealogists, and tonight I'm here with Kate Eakman, one of our amazing researchers, and she is going to be answering all of your questions about Irish genealogy research. Users submitted their questions on our website at legacytree.com/live, and we're going to try to get to as many of those questions as possible while we're broadcasting live here from Jamboree in Burbank, California. So we received a ton of questions like we normally do, so thank you to everyone who submitted. Like I said, we'll try and get to as many as possible. We received so many, we can't get to all of them, unfortunately, but we will try to snag a couple live questions. So if you do have a question, drop it in the comments, and we'll try to get to it this evening in the broadcast as well. So Kate, let's not waste any time. Let's jump into it so we can cover as much as we can in the next little bit here. Okay, this first question comes from Helen, and it's long, so pay attention. My 2 times great-grandparents came from Ireland to Ontario, Canada about 1846. William Henry and Margaret Byers came with 3 children. I have followed them through 1851 Durham, Ontario census till their deaths. Supposedly, they came from Ballyjamestuff, Cavan. Sorry about that. Information from William's second marriage here states his parents as William and Jane. My 2 times great-grandfather William had 6 or 7 brothers and 3 sisters who came also. It is possible my 3 times great-grandfather William married more than once, as George, the youngest son, supposedly brought his mother as Sarah Byers. She says, what a muddle, and I can agree, having stumbled over just reading that question. Can you help me locate this family in Ireland?
There's a lot of information that Helen has here, but probably one of the most important things that is missing to help us with this is the religion of her family. In Ireland, that's probably the most important thing to have besides the name of their family surname. Whether a person was Roman Catholic or Protestant helps direct us to which kinds of records we're looking for and where to find them. As well as whether they were Protestant, if they were Baptist or Presbyterian or any other Protestant faith. For instance, she mentioned that the family came from Ballyjamestuff, and I got this question ahead of time and looked at it. Ballyjamestuff does not have a Catholic church in it. Historically, the church wasn't built until after the family left there, because she said they arrived in Canada in 1846. So there wouldn't be any Catholic records. There were Methodist records. There were Presbyterian records. The closest place for Catholic records are at a town called Crosserlow, and that could possibly have some baptismal records and maybe marriage records. So Helen, the first thing you would need to do is find out what religious faith your family had at that time, so that you know where you're going to be looking for the records. 2 places that you might go to look for them would be a for-fee site is called Roots Ireland, and it's just rootsireland.ie, and they have a searchable database that you could find records, church records there, except for County Kerry. Ballyjamestuff isn't there, so that's not a problem. That would be a good place for you. Other people might also need to use irishgenealogy.ie. That's a free site that includes County Kerry as well as Cork and Dublin. So those are 2 places to go to look for church records once you know what your family's religious faith was in Ireland.
Perfect. Great information. And I will drop the links to those 2 different websites in the comments following the broadcast, so watch for those. This next question also ties in the importance of knowing your ancestors' religion, and it comes from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, if you're listening, drop us a like or a comment. Okay, another long one. She says, I was hoping that you may have some suggestions on how to begin discovering the area in Ireland where my McKimmon relatives came from so that I can research this family line. And I might have said that wrong as well. According to family history, my second great-grandfather, John McKernan, and his wife, Julia Lanigan, were born in Ireland, but the location is unknown. We do know that John and Julia emigrated to England because they were married in Manchester on March 19, 1838, which does give us a bit of a time frame to work with. And from their marriage certificate, we know John's father's name was Philip. At the time of the marriage, worked as a porter in an unknown location. They obviously stayed in England because, according to a birth document, my great-grandfather, Peter McKernan, was born in Liverpool, England, on March 3rd, 1846. Of note, while in Ireland, 2 relatives were told that those with the name McKernan, which they referred to as McKernan with different spelling, and of the Catholic faith, probably came from Northern Ireland. Many thanks for any direction you may be able to offer.
Well, this is a great question, and again, Elizabeth has a lot of good details in here to help us. And the little note that came from a visit to Ireland where many of the McKiernan family were Catholic is really important for us. We also have, Elizabeth did that extra research and used the marriage certificate in England, which I love English marriage certificates because they usually will include the name of the bride's father and the groom's father, as well as their occupation and a note if they're deceased. So with this, we know that John is the son of Philip, and we know that it's probably true that they were Catholic. And so that marriage record is extremely useful for getting some additional information. And Elizabeth is looking to find out where in Ireland the family is going to come from. And so she's done what I would do to start with, which is to collect as much information as possible about the family before they're in Ireland to see if there are any clues. Now, again, as I suggested for Helen's question, I actually did a little poking around, and I went to Ireland, and I found some possible baptismal records. I found an 1811 baptismal record for John Kernan, which is very, very close to Kiernan or McKiernan, and we'll talk a little bit later, if that's okay, Amber, about the use of Mick and its lack of use. And John's father was Philip Kernan. According to this baptismal record, his mother's name was Mary Lancaster. And then I also found a potential things that you know, but that gives you specific places to begin looking for, based on the fact that we presume that the family is Catholic and knowing that John's father's name was Philip. Records in Ireland are a little bit different, Amber, than they are other places. There was a big fire in 1922 during some of the Irish Civil War, and a lot of the records, the Four Courts fire, destroyed a lot of civil records and religious records as well. So civil records are available in Ireland beginning in 1864 in general. Unless it was non-Roman Catholic, then there would be marriage records starting as early as 1845. So if your family was born before 1864, you're not going to find a civil birth record. It's only going to be a parish church record. If they were born after 1864, then you'll be able to find, hopefully, both a parish record and a civil record. And you can get those either from the GRO, the General Register Office for the Republic of Ireland, or from PRONI, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, depending on where they were born. There are Presbyterian records available at the Presbyterian Historical Society, and Amber, I'll give you the link to put on our site for that later. If it's Presbyterian, they can be helpful for finding those records. The Church of Ireland has whatever records survived the 1922 fire at Four Courts, and that's ireland.anglican.org. I'll give you that link as well.
Perfect.
And then, of course, Roman Catholic records are the predominant religious faith records that you'll find in Ireland. A lot of people ask about, well, maybe I should write to church and get the parish priest to give me copies of those records. That's not likely to accomplish your goal in Ireland. For the most part, the priests don't have the time to go through hundreds of years of records looking for your family.
I can only imagine.
So even visiting is not likely to do a lot of good. But those records are available pre-1880 at the National Library of Ireland online. So that's not a searchable engine. Use something else like Roots Ireland or Irish Genealogy to find a date and a place, and then you can actually find those records available for free online at NLI, National Library of Ireland.ie. One other last thing I wanted to mention really quickly about this, she talked about her family was McKernan or maybe McKiernan. I found McKernan. Don't get hung up on the spelling of names, Irish names, think phonetically, rather than, well, this doesn't have the same letters. If it sounds the same, it's possible it's the right one, and we can talk about that a little bit more
And that's
later.
a great point, Kate. Thanks for mentioning that. And Elizabeth was actually joined with us in this broadcast. She said she gave us thumbs up, so she's here. So I hope that provided some useful information for you, and you can go a little bit further in your ancestry. We've got quite a few people watching right now. Let's say hi real quick. Donna Bridgman. Hi, Donna. She's joining us from New Zealand.
Wonderful.
Kelly, I can only see the top 5 comments right now. Linda Mack says hello. Hi, Linda. Patrice McClure gave us a smiley face. Hello.
Yay.
Smiley face back. Let's see. Kelly Sue Kaiser Davenport. She says her name is Holly McLeod and her father was, oh, it's going too fast. We'll have to come back and answer those comments because they're going too fast. Too many people. Oh, hi from Rio Vista, California. Hello. Margaret Kimes also says hello. Helen Brown says hello. Okay, let's go to a next question and then hopefully we'll get some more comments in here because there's too many coming too fast. Okay, this question comes from William, Kate, and he says, my great-grandfather, William Coulter, emigrated to Ontario from Enniskillen in 1830 at age 18. He was a Protestant farmer and illiterate. How can I locate probable relatives in the many towns around Enniskillen?
Okay, this is great because we have a name, we have a place, Enniskillen, and we know Protestant. So that really helps to narrow it down.
Right.
I'm assuming here in this question that, William, what you're looking for, you said you're looking to locate probable relatives, and you're right, Enniskillen is a very specific location. There are lots of little towns, villages around there. So just because somebody's from Enniskillen, I mean, that's actually their home. We do the same thing today. You see really from one of the communities surrounding it.
Yep.
So one of the things that I would use in this case is I would look at traditional naming patterns. In Ireland, and it's true in other places as well, but Ireland used a pattern of naming their children, folks did. And this is true regardless of whether you were wealthy or you were poor, whether your family was Protestant or Catholic, your social status. The tradition was, and of course it's a pattern, not a law, so it doesn't always hold true. The son usually was named for the paternal grandfather. The second son in the family was named for the maternal grandfather. And then the third son would have been named for the father. So, for instance, in my family, the son would have been named Melvin, unfortunately. The second son would have been named Austin, my mother's father's name. The third son would have been named John, my father's name. And so that's a good way to start looking for your family, is looking at that traditional naming pattern. The same also holds true for daughters. The eldest daughter be named for the mother's mother, the second daughter be named for the father's mother, and then the third daughter would be named for the mother. Of course, you have to take into consideration, in earlier times, it was not uncommon to name a child the same name as a child that was deceased. So you might find that the child named for the grandfather passed away, and another son was born later and given that same name. The other situation you might have is that if the father was named the same name as his father, then you're not going to have two Thomases in the family. So be flexible with that, and it's not a law, but that's a good way to start looking for your family, is looking at the children's names and comparing baptismal records and birth records and marriage records. Another place that I'd like to encourage William to try is an organization called Ireland Reaching Out. And this was started as sort of a reverse genealogy. These are folks who live in Ireland who are looking for the ancestors of their ancestors who left Ireland. So these are people who live in Ireland, and they're trying to find out what happened to great uncle Frank, who left Ireland in the 1870s or whatever. And you can go to their website. It's irelandxo.com. It's free. They have forums where you can post a question and talk with other people. And I actually looked at that a little bit briefly and found there are several threads regarding the Coulter family living in Enniskillen. So there's a possibility that you can talk to someone, tracing your family, kind of compare your family tree with their family trees, and maybe find your ancestors, your Irish family members still there in Ireland today. And they can help you pinpoint perhaps even the farm where your family came from.
Perfect. Okay, we've got friends joining us from Michigan, New York, Las Vegas. Thanks for being here with us.
Wonderful.
Okay, this next question comes from Douglas, and he says, my ancestor David McCready has been traced back to southern Scotland, but I grew up being told we were Irish. How can I trace the Irish roots?
Okay. This is a great question, Douglas. It happens a lot. We hear that our family is one thing, we find out there's something else, and we're trying to find out what's going on. So the McCready or the McCready family was traced back to Scotland. It sounds like, I'm not sure exactly from this, but possibly they skipped from the United States directly to Scotland, and so they're not necessarily Irish. So one of the possibilities could be that your family is Scots-Irish. The other possibility is that it's not the McCready family that you should be looking for your Irish genealogy. It might be a different one. The Scots-Irish were Protestants from Scotland who moved to Ireland as early as the 1600s. And eventually some of them then immigrated from Ireland to the United States. Sometimes when the Scots-Irish moved to Ireland, predominantly they landed in Northern Ireland, and most of them stayed very staunchly Protestant, and they married other Protestant Scotsmen. But some of them kind of went native. They married Irish women, and rarely, but sometimes they even converted to Catholicism. That's one possible answer, is the family may actually have just landed in Ireland for a little bit, but never really was Irish, if you will. The other possibility, though, is that not all Irish names sound Irish. It would make sense to see McCready or McCready and think it's possibly my Irish name, or you might look at your Murphy family or your McConaughey family or something like that and think those are my Irish folks. But there are other Irish names that don't sound Irish to us. My family, we have the Greys, who came from Dublin. Gray sounds like a nice, normal English name, but they were my Irish ancestors. The Townsends, the Barrys, the Shaws, the Wilds, Allens, all those names are potential Irish names, or the Lacys. So you can't just assume because it doesn't sound Irish to us that it's not an Irish family. So it's a good idea to trace all of your lineage back to your immigrant ancestors to find out where that Irish ancestor came from.
Yeah, that's a great point, and probably a pretty common misconception. Okay, this next question comes from Lynn. She says, I'm not even sure if they are Irish, although my grandmother said they were, but her grandparents were James O'Fay and Mary Monk. The farthest back I can find them is in Quebec, Canada. They are listed on their son's 1843 birth certificate with James' name spelled as Iffay. How would I find them, where and when they came? How would I find where and when they came to Quebec, as I believe that no one was keeping track back then of ship arrivals?
So this is a good question, Lynn, and you're right. There are not a lot of ship arrivals, but we will talk about that a little bit later, hopefully. There were a few people keeping some records. One of the biggest problems that we deal with Irish research is that a lot of Irish names ended up being anglicized. When the English came over and took over Ireland, they imposed a lot of things on the Irish people. Their language, they attempted to impose their religion, and the names. We expect Irish names to start with O something or Mac or Mick something, but the English pretty much wiped those out. And so sometimes you'll find that your family came to this country and that's when they added those back in. Mm. And in Ireland, they won't have that beginning prefix added to it. O'Fay or Fay is a real Irish name, so is Iffy, I-F-E or I-F-F, E-E. That's also an Irish name. But Iffay, I-F-F-A-Y, is not historically an Irish name. One of the things we might be dealing with here is the birth certificate spelling of the name could just be someone who's not familiar with hearing an Irish accent and with Irish sounding names, and so he wrote what he heard as opposed to the way the family themselves might have spelled the name. One of the great places I like using for doing name searches is John Grenham has a website, johngrenham.com, and it's a for-fee site. But it's a great place to go use for surname search because you can type in an Irish name and it will give you the whole list of all the variations of that name.
Oh, wow.
Plus where it's found most frequently. So if you don't have any idea where it's from, there's no guarantee just because most folks with that name came from County Cork that that's where your family is, but it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you to consider that. We don't get paid extra for me saying this or anything, but johngrenham.com, you can have you can have an annual membership, you can have a month-long membership, or you can for $5 have a one-day membership. So it's worth looking at. The other option is he has a book called Tracing Your Irish Ancestors. It costs about $40. If you do a lot of Irish research, that might be a good source to use as well. One other free site for Irish names is an older book. It's called Irish Names and Surnames. It was written by Patrick Wolfe in I think 1907. It's available for free on archive.org. So those are all some good sites for finding your Irish surnames and given names.
Perfect. Great resources. And like Kate said, we don't have any kind of affiliate partnership with any of them. We just think they're great resources. So unbiased information right there. Okay, this next question was submitted by Jennifer, and it discusses the various spellings of ancestors' names. She says, my second great-grandfather, Andrew Doherty, I am painful at this, was born, as he states, in County Mayo, Ireland, about 1843. I find him in England in 1865, as there is a marriage certificate for him, 1881 in Teignmouth, England. Teignmouth?
Sure.
Close enough. Okay, in 1891 in Hunsley, England, and I believe he died in 1905, Leeds, Yorkshire, England. I'm trying to find his parents on Ancestry. There are trees that have his parents listed as William and Rebecca Ferry. I have asked to verify that they are definitely his parents, and no one can verify that information. How can I find out who his parents actually were?
Well, first of all, Jennifer, I really applaud you for asking that question, because a lot of people look at somebody else's online tree and say, it's online, it must be true.
Yes.
So that's really excellent research and excellent practice is to ask someone if their tree doesn't have a document that proves this is the parent of that person. Ask them, because sometimes people have wonderful personal things, Amber. They might have a family letter or a family Bible that they got that information from. But if we don't ask, we don't know. And so it sounds like Jennifer's been doing her due diligence. She's been asking, but people don't know where this information came from. Some things to consider here. She talks about spellings of names, and I want to just talk a little bit quickly about first names can be really tricky because you might find first names being spelled English version or a Gaelic version of the name or Latin. And some of them are easy. Brigidai and Bridget are probably the same person. Maybe we would know Jacobus is James, but those of us who aren't really good Latin scholars, that might not be as obvious. Honora, Nori, and Honoria are all the same person. Morris and Mauritius are the same person, and John and Sean are the same person. So we've got to keep our, the Gaelic name and the Latin version of the first names. Spelling is not as important back then, whether you're talking about Irish names or you're looking at names in England. They tend to be spelled phonetically, so we can't get too hung up on that. And that's true for enumerators, both in the United States and in Ireland and Canada as well. I did look at some of these things that Jennifer was talking about here, and she mentioned the 1891 census. And I looked at that, and I found Andrew Doherty, and it's spelled one of those options we have, Doherty and Docherty even. And I found Andrew Docherty in this census here, and he's listed as a widow, and I know Jennifer already knows this, she's found it, but this is possibly a place to try using the traditional family naming pattern, is to list all of Andrew's children and see if that works with the pattern as well, to give you a clue of where to go. If he said that he was born in County Mayo, and I see that on the 1891 English census, it says, where born, Ireland, County Mayo. Chances are that's where he was born. He didn't have unless he's got some horrible, wicked past he's trying to run from, he's not likely to make that one up. So I would start my search in County Mayo looking for the birth of Andrew Docherty. It's born about 1843, so we'd be looking for parish records as opposed to civil records. One of the things that I find really interesting about all of Jennifer's question here is that this is a good place to consider the value of sources that we're using. Primary sources are always better to use than a secondary source. A secondary source might be an online family tree, it might be an index, or a transcript where somebody else has said what the document is like. The most important things for us to use as genealogists to do good genealogy is to actually look at a copy of the record itself. But which record? A birth and baptismal record is likely to be the most accurate thing. The parents are most likely to properly say what their names are and whether the child is a boy or a girl, and approximately when he or she was born or when he or she was baptized. Marriage records are probably our second most accurate records, but there can be situations where somebody might fudge their age or the number of marriages they've had. Ladies sometimes don't want their husbands to know that they are a few years older. People don't want their spouse to know that this is not their first marriage. A census is likely to be accurate, especially if there's evidence that the family members are the people who gave the information, but they might not be. So you have to look at some of the other clues around there. And then death records are least likely to be accurate because the person giving the information is not the deceased person who knows everything. The person giving the information is a family member who just lost a loved one. And so they're dealing with grief, stress, exhaustion, trying to remember piddly little details at a time when it doesn't seem very important.
And that's a good point. Okay, this next question comes from Richard. He says, I have an ancestor from County Clare, Thomas Driscoll, born late 1820s or early 1830s, and have been unable so far to find a record of his birth. I believe his father was James and his mother Emma Connors. He also had a brother named James.
Okay. There's a lot of potential here. We've got an approximate date of birth, a place of birth, the names of the parents, and the name of a brother. But the key question for this one is, Richard, and you probably know this but and didn't have the ability to give us all the information, but how do we know the parents' names? Where does that information that his father's name was James and his mother's name was Emma, possibly Emma Connors, where does that come from? Because we need to know where that came from. If it's just something somebody said on a family tree, we need to dig into that a little bit more. If it's what Thomas said on his marriage record and what he said on his naturalization record or something like that, put more weight into that and go from there to find his records. And I heard that his ancestor was a military prisoner, that he was sold to the colony, and that he had to work off his debt. The first thing I have to address on this one is the Irish slavery question. We hear that a lot from people. It's sometimes used as an apology for excusing black slavery, African slaves. There weren't Irish slaves. Nobody sold Irish men and women to anybody in this country. People may have chosen to come here as an indentured servant. That was a great way to start over and a great way to get out of debt. You would agree to work for somebody for 7 years. They would pay your passage to the United States or Canada. You would work for that person for 7 years. And at the end of that 7 years, you were allowed to go do whatever you wanted. Usually something written into the contract that they had to provide you with a new suit of clothes, a sum of money, or tools to pursue your career that you had learned, like shoemaking or whatever. You could also find instances when landlords enclosed their land, where it used to be lots of little farmer fields, and they take over your field and my field, and they're going to open it up into be a sheep pasture. Instead of trying to figure out what to do with us, sometimes it was easier for the landlord just to buy us a boat ticket and send us to Canada or the United States. The other option is he could have been a military prisoner. Chances are, though, usually military prisoners would have been ransomed, or they would be exchanged in a prisoner exchange. Most likely, if you were a prisoner, you were allowed to give your parole. Back in those days, a person's word was their bond. Mm-hmm. So you promise that you wouldn't go fight against the colonists anymore, and then they would let you go free. We did that a lot with our Hessian soldiers in the American Revolutionary War, and it happened with other soldiers as well. So there are lots of reasons why people came to this country. They could have come for military reasons. They could have come to escape economic hardships. They could have come for opportunity to better life as an indentured servant. And so we need to look more into your ancestors to find out what life was like in Ireland when they left, and to know more about the reasons why they came.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Okay, this next question comes from Debbie. She says, our Irish ancestor crossed the ocean in the early 1770s and settled for a time in Pennsylvania. Some say he came from Cork, but his headstone in Canada clearly states Mayo. I've not found him on readily available online Irish or general genealogy research sites, so I'm thinking I'll have to send email inquiries. Where do you suggest I start? And then her second part to this question says, his name, John Parker, would presumably have had an English origin, and perhaps this may help with determining if he was from Cork or Mayo. I've done general historic research of Ireland's complicated background, but I'm at a loss as to how to determine individuals and names who came, again presumably, and settled in England or Ireland.
Well, this is a really cool question. I had a blast with this one, Amber, because there's so much information that Debbie has included here, and she's made a lot of really good determinations about things. The big question, of course, is he from Cork or is he from Mayo? Which county are we supposed to do our research in? You're right, Debbie. John Parker definitely sounds like a Protestant English name, not a Roman Catholic Irish name. I looked around a little bit, did some of the same research I'm sure you did. I found his biography on Find a Grave, which offers clues, but because there aren't any sources, we can't, just because it's on Find a Grave doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but we don't have any sources. So I did a little bit of looking at the biography, and the one part in the biography claimed that he was a member of the New York Volunteers. That was a British militia unit that was raised in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So that does fit in with being in Canada and being a pro-British, not a pro-American freedom kind of person. So that would fit. The biography also talks about an Ontario land petition. I found this document online at the Library and Archives of Canada. And in it, it was so interesting because John Parker wrote a really important little line. He said, let me pull this out because I brought this with me. I loved this thing. John said, he wrote, according to the King of England, he wrote that your petitioner, that's John, has served His Majesty from his infancy, having been born in the 18th Regiment. And wow. That doesn't sound like a lot. It's like being confusing. How can a person serve since infancy and how can he be born in a regiment? But this tells us that John's father was a soldier in what was then known as the Royal Irish Regiment. It got renamed in the 1750s and became the 18th Regiment of Foot. It was an infantry unit. But John was born, his father was a soldier in that unit. And John, according to his headstone, which was put up by his wife, John predeceased his wife by about 15 or 20 years, I think, if I remember right, it says he was born in Mayo. And so that's where I would start looking, quite frankly. I would also start looking at the 18th, the Royal Irish Regiment, to find out where they are and what they're doing, so we can start to figure out where they were at that time. British units didn't really encourage their soldiers, actually they strongly discouraged their soldiers from being married, but they could have wives that followed along with them. particularly if they were officers. And I'm not saying that this is the case, but there was a Captain Parker at about the same time that John Parker was born. There's obviously more research would have to be done, but this was really interesting. What I would do to start with here, Debbie, is I would contact the National Army Museum. It's nam.ac.uk, and ask them if they have rosters of the Royal Irish Regiment from that time period, and you're looking for a soldier named Parker. And then from there, you should be able to start determining who his parents are and where he was born, and do some more research that way.
Perfect. That's fascinating. You found some great information there, Kate.
It was so much fun.
Perfect. Okay, this question comes from Faith, and we are almost out of time, so let's try and get through these as quickly as we can.
Okay, I'll talk fast.
Okay, she says, my ancestors came from the 5-mile town in Clogher area of County Tyrone, Northern Ireland. How can I find more out about their relations and exact place that they lived? They left in 1843 to migrate to County Durham, Ontario, Canada.
So I assume in this one that Faith is trying to find, when she says exact place, I mean, the 5-mile town is a townland. It's about a third of a mile square, so it's a pretty small place. I assume what Faith's looking for is what farm she's trying to find in that case. This is a good place, though, to talk about place names in Ireland. We have townlands, which are small little chunks of land. We have we can have a civil parish or a religious parish. There could be a county or a barony, a poor law union. So finding where a person is located, helpful place is townlands.ie. That's a free site. You can put the name in, it'll help you find where it is. John Grenham's site also has it's a for-fee site, but it has a place name search as well. For this case, it sounds though to me like what Faith's looking for is what farm or what street or what house they lived. This is a place where I would use the Ireland Reaching Out, that irelandexo.com. I would try to get in touch with some folks from 5-mile town and ask them about the family name. Do you know where these people lived? And go work from there with that. 1843 is prior to Griffith's valuation, so that was a place where they looked at all the land. They literally said this person lives here, this person lives there for taxation purposes. But that's going to be before that was going to happen. So that's what I would look for.
Perfect. Okay, this question comes from Sherry, and it goes back to talking about the ship manifest that you mentioned earlier. She says, I'm looking for ship manifests for the time period of 1840 to 1850, the potato famine era, and having trouble locating these relatives. Any advice for searching and where to begin?
So, as you know already, the lists of this era are going to be very limited. They will usually, the passenger lists will have only names. They're not like the 1890s, 1900 passenger lists that have your name, your age, your occupation, how much money you have, where you were born, who your parents are. These just have a name. Sometimes even only the head of the family is listed. So even if mom and dad and the 6 children traveled, the dad's name might be the only one on that list. There are not going to be any ages, no places of birth, no destination, usually any more specific than a state or a province in Canada. There are some guides to assist you, though. The Family Search Wiki has a lot of recommendations for specific locations like the United States or Canada or Australia. William Philby is writing, I guess, a series. It's called Passenger and Immigration Lists Index. This is growing. He's constantly being added to. These are passenger lists to the U.S. and Canada, starting from the 17th through the 19th century. And so those are 2 places that I would go to be looking for passenger lists for that early of a time period.
Great, thank you. Okay, this next question was submitted by Sheila, and she recently completed a DNA test, and she says, I found out that I am 49% Irish and Welsh descent. I have followed my lineage back to where my ancestors came from Ireland. I have hit a roadblock because I don't have any information on their names, nor what part of Ireland they came from. All I have are their children's names. I have always felt a close connection to Ireland, and now that we have found out about my link to Ireland, I would really love to know where they came from.
Okay. Well, Sheila, you've got some good information to start with here. You have the names of the children who were born in the United States, it sounds like, whose parents were the Irish immigrants. That's a good start. And they may have been born in Canada, U.S., Canada, whichever. So I would start with looking at census records trying to trace those children back in time to find them living with their parents. Their marriage records, depending on the time and the place where they married, oftentimes marriage records include the name of the parents of the bride and the groom. Their death records, although as we mentioned earlier, are possibly not accurate, but a clue is better than no information. Obituaries are another possibility. So you have, even though you don't have the parents' names right now, you have the possibility of a lot of tools to provide you with that in the future. So that's where I would start, Sheila, and good luck.
Great, thank you. Okay, this next question comes from Jay. He says, my great-grandfather Patrick Fay was a marble cutter in Galway in the 1850s. Are there employment records for quarry workers in Galway in that era that have been put online? If these records haven't been digitized, are there Galway historical associations that might possess such records?
That's a great question, Jay, and a question that I've actually looked at before. To the best of my knowledge, I haven't found any marble cutter professional guild lists that are available online any place. Because you have a specific location, you know that he was from Galway, I would look at one of two places, either the East Galway Family History Society or the Galway Family History Society West. Two versions of the same thing, East and West. You can find them by Googling them. They're both for-fee sites, but they have a list of the records they have. Neither one mentions any sorts of apprenticeship records or records that relate to people's occupations, but they both also say, both societies noted that they have other records that are smaller, and they encourage you to contact them to find out what they have. So I would work with the East Galway Family History Society and the Galway Family History Society West and see what they can find for you.
Perfect. Okay, this question comes from Linda, and it was kind of a common recurring theme that we received in multiple submissions, so we wanted to be sure we included this. She says, my great-grandparents and my grandfather arrived in Canada around 1850 from Ireland. For the last 20 years, I've tried to find out where in Ireland they came from. Help!
So, and this is a great place to start, really, Linda. So this is a kind of a good way for us to remind everybody of what we've talked about for this whole podcast here. So the first question we want to know is your family's religion, and it's not what you are now necessarily. Go back as far as you can, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, and ask them, what was their religious faith. The names of your grandfather's siblings could be potentially useful for looking at that family naming pattern. Your grandfather, you said, arrived in Canada from Ireland, so that sounds to me like he was a young man who was then possibly born in Canada or married in Canada. So I would look for his marriage record. That might have the names of his parents, which we already know, but it might also have a specific county that he was born. It might just say Ireland, but it might have a name of a county. Look also for the great-grandparents' death records. If they, depending on when and where in Canada they died, it might include more specific information about their parents' names or the place in Canada they were from. And obituaries are another great source potentially as well. So find the religion, look for the naming patterns as a clue.
And sign up for our newsletter. You can do that at legacytree.com/blog, and you'll receive weekly research tips, advice, and you can get more information on future upcoming live broadcasts. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.